just what the folk believe, but also how the folk employ their bodies and marshal their resources in practices that seek to delineate what is good, what is beautiful, and what is true. If you follow the work of this pioneering scholar, you know that she is quite comfortable hooking up wisdom from the lecture hall and the pool hall. She's the kind of ethicist and scholar who knows how to connect the sanctuary and the street corner. And I am so pleased to say that she is a key member of my wisdom circle, a sister beloved. And we have been on the pilgrimage now for nearly 30 years, and there is such a rich kinship that my wife, Lizetta, our daughter, Karis, and I share with Dr. Floyd-Thomas, her husband, Dr. Juan Floyd-Thomas, and their daughter, Lillian, who graces us with her presence this evening. It is my hope that this lecture hall, which extends from the walls of this chapel to the many Zoom rooms around the corner and across the globe, also becomes a fellowship hall where we become different and better people because the dialogue this evening sharpened our minds and softened our hearts. All of you are welcome in this place. And Dr. Floyd-Thomas, teach all you want in here tonight. We hear you gladly.
Greetings, I'm Janet McLean, an alum of this esteemed institution and the chair of the Board of Trustees, which actually today has been a labor of love. And in the spirit of transitioning from this day to being present in this holy space, I invite us to be in the spirit of prayer. O most gracious one who surrounds us with air and with light, we ask that you would buoy our spirits in this evening hour. We are ready to hear a new word. We are ready to hear a challenging thought. We are ready to be with one another and with you. In your holy name I pray. Amen.
As we were preparing for the liturgy and I was speaking with Mr. Samunye, and we were just discussing how we would prepare and be a part of the worship experience, we just talked about how we just needed God to be present with us and how we just wanted to sing God's presence into this space. So we invite you to join us as we sing a simple song, but a profound song, Kumbaya.
Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya.
Someone's praying, Lord, kumbaya. Oh, Lord, kumbaya. Someone's crying, Lord, kumbaya. Someone's crying, Lord, kumbaya. Someone's crying, Lord, kumbaya. Oh, Lord,
Somebody needs you.
someone needs you, Lord, kumbaya. Someone needs you, Lord, kumbaya. Someone needs you, Lord, kumbaya. Oh, Lord, kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Oh, Lord, kumbaya.
Good evening. Shelby Rooks was committed to theological education and the public responsibility of the church. His tenure at CTS from 1974 to 1984 made him the first Black president of a predominantly white seminary. He was an influential leader in the United Church of Christ and a consistent advocate for the training of African American church leaders. Rooks brought renewed vision of mission and relationship to the local church. Rooks had a long career as a pastor, scholar, and administrator. He was executive vice president of the United Church Board for Homeland Ministries from 1984 until his retirement in 1992. During his tenure, Rooks oversaw programs involving health and welfare, higher education, evangelism and church extension, Christian education, publishing, and social justice ministries. Rooks strengthened the UCC's educational ministries and supported a strong AIDS ministry as well as ministries for the homeless and for community action. Throughout his career, he advocated the training of African American church leaders. He was founding president of the Society for the Study of Black Religion and served for 14 years with the Fund for Theological Education in Princeton. Rooks was a frequent writer and lecturer. His articles appeared in more than 30 journals. He wrote 3 books. Rooks was born on October 19, 1924 in Beaufort, North Carolina. His family's roots in the UCC tradition extend as far back as 1879, when his great-great-granduncle, Michael P. Jenkins, organized a congregational church in Beaufort. Following military service, Rooks earned a BA degree from Virginia State University in 1949 and an MDiv in 1953 from United Theological Seminary in New York. He did additional graduate study at Columbia University Teachers College in New York, England's Mansfield College of Oxford University, the North American College in Rome, Italy, and the Episcopal Theological Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas. He held honorary degrees from 9 institutions. We are thankful for the life and legacy of Charles Shelby Rooks.
am delighted to present the winner of this year's C. Shelby Rooks Award, Reverend Jamie L. Fluker. Jamie L. Fluker is a native of Decatur, Illinois. She is a doctoral student studying in the area of womanist theology, ethics, and culture at Chicago Theological Seminary. Her research centers on womanist ethics, identity, and activism of Black women as preachers, prophets, and community organizers. To this end, Reverend Fluker serves as a faith and congressional community organizer for Southsiders Organized for Unity and Liberation. In her work, she's responsible for developing and sustaining partnerships with congregations, faith leaders, and community groups to increase involvement, awareness, and engagement of diverse faith communities and community-based organizations. While a student at CTS, Reverend Fluker has served as a student representative to the Board of Trustees, as a member of the Student Government Association, convener of the PhD Student Association, and has assisted faculty and staff with various educational development opportunities for doctoral students. Reverend Fluker was a presenter for the 2023 Open House Lecture Series and the recipient of the 2023 Sanderson Women in Leadership Award. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from Carthage College in Political Science and Criminal Justice. Prior to her studies in Chicago, Reverend Fluker completed her Master's in Theological Studies from Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. While at the other CTS, Christian Theological Seminary, Fluker was named the recipient of the Reverend Bill Duffy Theology Prize. Reverend Fluker aims to combine her academic studies, activism, and service to the church and academy to organize liberation for communities in response to the gospel. Reverend Fluker currently serves as an associate minister at Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church in Chicago. Congratulations, Reverend Fluker.
To CTS President Brad Baxton, Dean Vogt, the Board of Trustees, faculty, staff, and friends in the CTS community. It is a blessing to be in community with all of you today, and it's a blessing to be in this physical space today as well. To the CTS student body, both on campus and virtually, many of you have served as my co-conspirators and conversation partners, and for that, I am eternally grateful. In this moment, I deem it inappropriate to honor the outrageous, audacious, courageous, responsible, and in charge, serious women who have joined that great cloud of witnesses, whose not only spirits and wisdom I carry with me, but their absence and their physical presence, while I miss them, I'm glad to have them with me on this journey. My mother, Rita Fluker, my maternal grandmother, Mildred Moore, and my paternal grandmother, Lou Ida Fluker, whose names I will continue to speak. I'm humbled by the nomination and selection for this award. CTS has made a space and cultivated the presence of this rowdy, righteous, rebellious, reserved scholar, preacher, and community organizer. We've gathered in this space physically and virtually to honor faith, freedom, and justice while also renewing our commitment to learning lessons of the past that will ultimately shape the future. I stand in the same spirit of ancestors like Fannie Lou Hamer, who constantly remind me that my job is to support whatever is right and to bring in justice where we've had so much injustice. It's a blessing to be in a place where my calling, my vocation, and my studies collide in such a way that the boots I wear that march into pulpits are also the boots I wear that march in the public square when protesting at City Hall, are the same boots I march into the halls of the academy and classrooms for conversation. And as a student, it's an honor to receive this award on a day where we will hear from Dr. Stacey Floyd-Thomas. Your contributions to me personally as a womanist scholar and a Christian social ethics ethicist has challenged me and has strengthened my service and my commitment to seek justice and to make justice known in places where it doesn't currently exist. So thank you all again.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Haley Hudler and I use she and her pronouns. I am CTS's Manager of Donor Engagement, a 2022 graduate, and one of the reasons why I chose CTS over any other seminary is because of its commitment to anti-racism and Black liberation. As a person of color and a transracial adoptee, the Black liberation movement heavily impacted my understanding of race and identity. And throughout the night, I urge you to keep your ears open and your heart open to being changed by the anticipated words spoken by Dr. Floyd-Thomas tonight. I want to acknowledge our 5 lecture ambassadors who are generously matching gifts of $25 or more to our Center for the Study of Black Faith and Life. Our ambassadors are Mr. Bill Evers, former trustee and family member of C. Shelby Rooks, Dr. Sharon Watson-Fluker, an active trustee, Reverend Gwendolyn Kirtland, CTS class of 08, Reverend Dr. Teresa Smallwood, JD, CTS class of 2017, and Reverend Troy Underwood, CTS class of 2011. Thank you all for your dedication to CTS and upholding the legacy of C. Shelby Rooks. I have donated personally during this time because of this limited time gift match opportunity, and I boldly ask all of you to participate. Go to ctschicago.edu/give or by scanning the QR code that is located in your program. Thank you all for joining us this evening on YouTube and in person.
I'm going to take liberty to make a slight change in the format. I want to introduce our speaker first, and then we want to bless her and sing her in as she gives her presentation, if you all don't mind. So I'm going to first introduce you, Dr. Stacey Floyd-Thomas, and then we will sing, and then we will hear your voice afterwards. Stacey Floyd-Thomas is the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Chair and Professor of Ethics and Society at Vanderbilt University. She was baptized and raised in the Black Baptist Church tradition and is an ordained pastoral counselor in both the Progressive National Baptist Convention and American Baptist Church USA. She is an internationally recognized scholar and leading voice in liberation theology and Christian social ethics, who provides leadership to several national and international organizations that educate, advocate, support, and shape the strategic work of individuals, initiatives, and institutions in their organizing efforts of championing and cultivating equity, diversity, and inclusion via organizations such as Black Religious Scholars Group, Society for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Religion, Strategic Ethical Expert Solutions, Society of Christian Ethics, and the American Academy of Religion. She holds a PhD in ethics, an MBA in organizational behavior, and 2 masters in comparative religion and theological studies, with certification in women's studies, cultural studies, and counseling. Not only has she published 10 books, most notably the upcoming When the Good Life Goes Bad, the U.S. and its 7 Deadly Sins, Religion, Race, and COVID-19, Confronting White Supremacy in the Pandemic and Deeper Shades of Purple, Womanism in Religion and Society, and numerous articles. She is also an expert in leadership development, an executive coach, and ordained clergy, equipped with business management. As a result, Floyd-Thomas has been a lead architect in helping corporations, colleges, universities, religious congregations, and community organizations with their audit, assessment, and action plans in accordance with and to evolving both the mission and strategic plans. Without question, she is one of the nation's leading voices in moral leadership in the United States and is globally recognized for her scholarly specializations in liberation theology and ethics, critical race theory, critical pedagogy, and post-colonial studies. Whether you engage her through their books, hear her sermons, study her lectionaries online, enroll in her Black Church Studies classes, receive her pastoral counseling or life coaching, or attend the many workshops, seminars, and lectures she gives, it is blatantly clear, as one scholar has said, Stacey Floyd-Thomas is accessible to any woman or man of goodwill who is committed to justice making in church, academy, and society. It is because of this reputation that she has received numerous honors and awards as a leading scholar and is a highly sought-after lecturer and scholar who has taught and lectured throughout the United States, as well as West Africa, Brazil, England, Egypt, France, Germany, Hong Kong, Italy, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. After we deliver the song, you will hear the voice of Reverend Dr. Stacey Floyd-Thomas. Let's give her a hand in advance. Yesterday, as we gathered here, we talked about how sometimes we engage in selective compassion. And this is a time when we need to come together and recognize that all pain hurts and evil is evil. And we literally need each other to survive. Not only do we need each other, we need the environment. We need each other, and we need to be present with each other in active fellowship. And so we just want to share with you all as we go into this lecture, we need each other to survive. Would you join with us and sing? It is His will that every need be supplied. You are important to me, and I need you to survive. I need you, you need me, we're all a part of God's body. Stand with me, agree with me, we're all a part of God's body. It is God's will that every need be supplied. You are to survive. You are important to me. I need you to survive. I pray for you. I pray for you. You pray for me. I love you. I need you to survive. I won't harm you with words from my mouth. I love you. I need you to survive. I pray for you. You pray for me. I love you. I need you to survive. I won't harm you with words from my mouth. I love you. I need you to survive. I pray for you. You pray for me. I love you. I need you to survive. I won't harm you with words from my mouth. I love you. I need you to survive. I pray for you. You pray for me. I love you. I need you to survive. I won't harm you with words from my mouth. I love you. I need you to survive. It is God's will that every need be supplied. You are important to me. I need you to survive. You are important to me. I need you to survive. You are important to me. I need you to survive.
Good evening. What a word already. What a word. It is a unique pleasure for me to be here in this hush harbor. And third time is the charm. My understanding is this is the first in-person Rooks lecture since COVID-19 did what it did. So it is good. This is the day. This is the day that the Lord hath made, and we are glad to be dwelling in it. I bring you greetings from the trifecta at Vanderbilt Divinity School, where I hold my post, the Black Religious Scholars Group, where I serve as founding chief executive officer, and as the member and theologian in residence at Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, where the Reverend Dr. Freddie D. Haynes III is my pastor and has pushed his way to Chicago to take over Operation Push. So it's good to be here, and in that same Trinity and trifecta, to be invited by my beloved brother, who has a way of leaving every single time I enter a place of employment or education. We were ships passing in the night in 1993 as I was leaving Candler School of Theology in Atlanta. He was coming to Emory University, and as I was being recruited to Vanderbilt Divinity School, he was leaving. So I have a way of pushing him out as he is pulling me in. There's a Godfather reference there, but and it is truly a blessing for me to be in the presence of so many people who have been life partners with me. My dearest beloved friend, my womanist muse in Buddha, before we knew what womanism was and before I got a master specializing purely on Buddhism, Blanche Cook, my good friend and also a Chicago house music native, civil rights employment attorney, as well as a Loyola professor of critical race theory and a co-author with me. She's here. We've known each other since our bachelor days some 30 some odd years ago. And many of the sweet fruit of my teaching, my very beloved, and many of ours, all of the ethicists at Vanderbilt, Christoph Ringer being here, the mother of my dear mentee, Melanie Jones, well, actually, Mrs. Reverend Dr. Mrs. Melanie Jones Quarles, Reverend Dr. Annette Jones is here, and then my beloved student, Jordan Griffin, who I am so glad you had the right mind to admit into your beloved doctoral program. And the sweetest fruit of my love and labor, Lillian Makeda Floyd-Thomas, my precocious and brilliant 14-year-old who saw it not robbery to use her October break hanging out with mom. It's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be with you this evening as a 2023 Shelby Rooks lecturer. The Reverend Dr. Charles Shelby Rooks was a well-renowned and beloved race man and church man who was amongst his peers not only as a hopeful spirit, but an institutional revolutionary in Zion, to borrow the title of his seminal work, Revolution in Zion, Reshaping African American History, a biography in first person. Rooks, in Trinity with his colleagues James Howell Cone and Benjamin Mays, was a revolutionary who understood Zion, quote, as a religious center where true believers gather to shift religious paradigms, to open intellectual doors, to knock down hegemonic barriers so that Black church folk can live, move, and have our being in the Holy of Holies, unquote. My mentor, the late Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon, who had the honor of having the Rooks lecture in 2012, called Rooks Revolutionaries, those of us who have the unmitigated gall and gumption to challenge dominated forms of knowledge acquisition and religious power, which is the prophetic mission and emancipatory ministry of those of us who benefited from the fruit of its labor. So this evening, in this sacred space, I am committed to take up Rooks Revolution in a different key and octave, in first person, singular, but hopefully first person plural, in decolonizing theological education by racing forward, the crux of our Christian social ethic in confronting the Enlightenment's hubris. In the first year of my graduate studies in the early 1990s, I recall several of my white, supposedly liberal professors, some historians, ethicists, and theologians, but all white males, had David Irving's Warpath, Alan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind, and Herrnstein and Murray's Bell Curve on their office bookshelves. And I said to myself, in the land of Philadelphia, of brotherly love and sisterly affection, after I left the Black Mecca for a higher calling, supposedly, what in the world was I doing in Zion? Of which I thought it to be. And finding myself in intellectual Babel in Babylon. As I looked at these texts, I realized that this bibliographic trend was as common a feature of my professor's office furnishing as was their leather satchel bag and a bottle of vodka, so the trace of their habits were undetectable in their desk drawers. I often wondered, why does Professor X not only own some of the most heinous forms of human horror turned scholarly conspiracy theory, but also has them literally shelved and showcased as displayed knowledge? One day, I got up the nerve to ask the question of one particular professor, who I assume to be a moral exemplar among our faculty, to which he claimed, Stacey, having an open mind means that we contend and consume ideas that are not our own, even when we stand in opposition to them, unquote. I responded, that's what I thought at first. But where are books such as Cornel West's Race Matters, and George Fredrickson's Black Liberation, or Bell Hooks' Black Looks, works that offer the truth about America, the truth about which Irving, Bloom, Herrnstein, and Murray are not only lying, but are also trying to deny and revise historically. His response: what are lies to some are merely opinions to others. Our job as ethicists is to attend to both. The infamous Lipstadt-Irving Holocaust denial battle is one just prime example of this matter of venue shopping from the point of privilege, power, and perspective. In 1993, American historian and Holocaust expert Deborah Lipstadt wrote and published Denying the Holocaust, The Growing Assault on Truth and Memory with Penguin Press. Like many Jewish studies and Holocaust scholars before her, Lipstadt had a firm policy of not debating the historicity or reality of the Holocaust. In the same way that legitimate historians will refrain from engaging whether the transatlantic slave trade, World War I, World War II, or the Vietnam War were actual events in the United States or world history. This scholarly resolve is well-founded if you debate the obvious. Instead of engaging legitimate new insights, you give authority to the unfounded, credibility to the crude, and lose intellectual footing, which make up the very essence of our moral ground, when you obfuscate what the Enlightenment is supposed to be. In the book, Lipstadt devoted a few hundred words discrediting David Irving, one of the world's most notorious Holocaust deniers, a British-born public speaker, author, and pseudo-historian who lacks a university degree, least of all an advanced degree in history. Irving had built an international reputation and lucrative career by repudiating in both writing and speech the veracity of the Holocaust and attempting to uplift the notoriety of Adolf Hitler. Irving gained prominence and gravitas as early as the 1970s in certain mainstream enclaves when he maintained that the Holocaust was a fallacy because Hitler never ordered the extermination of the Jews. Like many U.S. Civil War sympathizers, Irving took the position to promote a favorable, sympathetic narrative of Nazis by championing the lost cause of erasing from both German and European history the systematic genocide and the deliberate extermination of Jews. As but one example, Irving once claimed that, quote, "I don't see any reason to be tasteful about Auschwitz. It's baloney. It's a legend. In fact, more women died on the back seat of Senator Edward Kennedy's car at Chappaquiddick than ever died in a gas chamber at Auschwitz," unquote. Oh, the hyperbolic, historionic nature of such remarks are only outweighed by the sheer horror of their intended implications. It is inconceivable that such observations could be made by any learned person or college graduate who passed a world history course from any accredited university or college. But it is almost unfathomable that this would be considered as the claims of any legitimate scholar. To have any fulsome scholarly engagement of this assessment would be a sham, a shame, and ultimately a fool's errand. Although such pseudo-scholarship was nothing new within the public sphere, the extent to which educated elites were willing to indulge such counterfactual, contrarian, and corrosive views within the marketplace of ideas was a looming threat in the age of mass media or higher education. The ruse of Irving's publications aims to resurrect the exoneration of Hitler's evil ploy in The Final Solution, Ultimately, Irving's provocations resulted in London's high courts finding that his work was, for his own ideological reasons, persistently and deliberately misrepresented and manipulated historical evidence. Thanks be to God. Nevertheless, his rants have held sway in the scholarly mix, despite the fact that his maverick appeal proved he was neither a part of the historical profession nor held any degree in higher education. Not only have his publications been bestowed with a degree of scholarly significance, but they have afforded him the social power to charge a real scholar as Lipstadt for libel, as she fulfilled her professional duty to bear witness to the historical truth. As Lipstadt stated, quote, "It may seem an absurd semantic dispute to deny the appellation of historian to someone who has written 24 books or more about historical subjects. But if we mean by historian someone who is concerned to discover the truth about the past and to give as accurate a representation of it as possible, then Irving is not a historian. Those in the know, indeed, are accustomed to avoid the term altogether when referring to him and use some circumlocution such as historical writer instead. Irving is essentially an ideologue who uses history for his own political purposes. He is not primarily concerned with discovering or interpreting what happened in the past. He's concerned merely to give a selective, tendentious account of it to further his own ideological ends in the present. The true historian's primary concern, however, is with the past. That is why, in the end, Irving is not a historian," unquote. Despite the fact that he is not a professional historian untethered to ethical standards of any school or scholarly guild, Irving was nonetheless able to litigiously interrogate and intimidate Lipstadt, a legitimate scholar and respected historian. He took her to task and ultimately to trial, not simply publicly, but by means of a British judicial process, wherein the defendant is presumed guilty until proven innocent, in hopes of stacking the odds even more in his favor. He pulled a real scholar from her own ground into distant shores where she was already considered guilty for his own means. In that court proceeding that took place, this case bears the meta-ethical attention for us. Here we have an undeniable intellectual impostor whose identity was inflated and empowered to such an extent that he was able not only to impress real scholars, but also to impose his indomitable will and lies on the likes of a Jewish American feminist female scholar who dared to invalidate them. His insistence, as well as his arrogance, was able to actualize a reality inversion, projecting upon Lipstadt his own character flaws and accusing her of his own shoddy scholarly ways. Through his false accusations, social manipulation, and abuse of the judicial process, a historical writer of such ill repute and intention as Irving was able to displace a legitimate scholarly historian from security, sanctity, and center of her professional guild, and subject her to the scorn of ill-informed public opinion, the threats of deeply rooted European anti-Semitism, and the presumption of legal culpability and guilt. Ultimately, Lipstadt was determined not to be guilty of libel, and that the allegation that Irving was a racist is also established during her case. In his ruling, the Honorable Mr. Justice Gray, I think his mama named him a great name, stated that Irving, quote, has for his ideological reasons persistently and deliberately misrepresented and manipulated historical evidence. That for the same reasons he has portrayed Hitler in an unwarrantedly favorable light, principally in relation to his attitude towards and responsibility for the treatment of Jews, that he is an active Holocaust denier, that he is an anti-Semitic and a racist, and that he associates with the right-wing extremists who promote neo-Nazism, which we shall not tolerate, unquote. However, even as the arduous legal process and truth ultimately bore out in Lipstat's favor, in a backhand form of sympathy, journalists still claim that Irving's was the author of his own downfall. The tragedy of that statement is that it misses what historians and scholars know all too well. Irving never should have risen to such a high standing in the first place. Now, this is nothing to scoff or dismiss, as this case bears witness both then and now, charlatans, whether they be DeSantis or Abbott, are not laughing matters when they can get away with advancing lethal lies that distort verifiable evidence, manipulate historical documents, ban books that have truth, and promote death-dealing neo-fascist agendas. To borrow a quote from John Adams, facts are stubborn things. Anyone who read the first few pages of Lipstat's Denying the Holocaust will note that it makes abundantly clear the distortion of facts, the manipulation of documentary evidence, and the promulgation of white supremacy at the heart of Holocaust denial. To bring this conundrum into sharper view, I recall the words of George Orwell. I don't know why this is coming on, who proclaims, quote, "We have now sunk to a new depth at which the restatement of the obvious is the first duty of intelligent people." Or as Mac Attram said, we all need to face it and to fix it. And as John Adams stated, whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. The Holocaust happened. The physical remains of its victims, the witness of its survivors, the confessions and public trials of its perpetrators, the videos and photographs of its atrocities, and the historical documents all bear direct, irrefutable witness. Millions of innocent people were murdered. For any person, let alone any scholar, to deny it and warrants its prioritization or placement alongside true scholarship is not to support debate, but to engage in real deception, and is stark evidence of the closing of both humanity's mind and soul. Yet this was not merely a scholarly skirmish about Holocaust scholarship. It was an outright fight about the Holocaust itself. Lipstat, like so many other scholars whose content of their scholarship is inextricably linked to the content of their character, found herself out of her realm and up against the ropes, confronting not only a revisionist and a denier, but a powerful legacy of indefatigable endeavors that sought to distort history by placing the burden of proof on the victim, whose experience and expertise are considered little less than libelous statements. In the final analysis, Lipstat's scholarship reigned supreme, but not without the support of a high-ticket legal team, costly experts, and the backing of Penguin Publishing House. An entire arsenal was necessary to ward off the attacks of an arrogant, self-aggrandizing, anti-Semite, Nazi apologist charlatan who was given social power to claim scholarly status. Although this was an international encounter, the Lipstadt-Irving scandal provides critical insight into the American crisis of knowledge production, lacking moral clarity and integral character. And so my question for you this evening is, in the midst of the empowerment of your preachings or the enlightenment of your education, do you got ethics? Are yours like Lipstat's, or are they like Irving's? Or are you just lukewarm and finding value in neutrality? The arduous work of scholars who do not embody the personas of dead white men is that they are compelled to undertake the praxis that liberates theory from its captivity to the intellectual frames and cultural values of those which cause and perpetuate the marginalization of others. Both obvious truths and objectified scholars are continuously placed on trial, burdening women and racial ethnic minoritized scholars with the imperative not only to know their field, but also to defend and arm themselves from the predictable and unavoidable reality of hate masquerading as history and terror projected onto theory. In so doing, as Katie Cannon once said, knowledge is legitimized only when vetted by and interpreted in the light of the gaze of misogynist subjectivities that masquerade as human normativity. When underrepresented scholars and perspectives do not pay homage or deference to these theories of terror, they are compelled not only to be doubly informed scholarly experts, but also to be veritable, fully armed revolutionaries, in that the truth will not always win out. Even though the notion of innocent until proven guilty in American jurisprudence countermands Great Britain's guilty until proven innocent, the Eurocentric, Anglophilic aspirations of American education, whether in the seminary or at the collegiate level, have nevertheless adopted and extended the home court advantage of power, pedigree, prestige, and privilege that allows for white male heteronormative perspectives to put our truths on trial, regardless of what the record or recollection shows. Now, for those of you wondering in the back of your minds, why is any of this an issue of deep worry and concern for me? Since my teenage years, I have spent a considerable amount of my time and mental energies, even as a Black missionary Baptist, born and raised in Corpus Christi, the sparkling city by the sea, on the Gulf Coast of Texas. I was also immersed in considerations and conversations as the president of the National Conference of Christians and Jews about interreligious dialogue, especially Jewish and Christian engagement. And I could not help but go there when I saw a post from my childhood best friend, Elizabeth Levy, who said, "I must share my thoughts as my voice and words are the only power I have to wield in this moment. I am a Jew married to a Muslim. My husband and I have created a home that has thrived over 25 years. Like most, we have watched in horror the brutal attacks of Hamas waged in Israel beginning Saturday. And we watched what we knew would be a swift and declarative response from Israel towards Gaza. Perhaps most distressing of all, we have watched our friends, families, and communities, Muslim and Jewish, retreat into what feels like polarized positions born out of the trauma reawakened by Saturday by a militant group of extremist terrorists. I know this bit of history will have to play out as it has so many times before. I wept this morning as I told my husband, my fear that our chance to see peace in our lifetimes has just slipped away as the dogs of war have been unleashed. How many more bombs and rockets must fall? How much more grief and pain be sustained? How many more tears must be shed? How much more blood spilled? I believe I am Yasiel Chai. I believe in a free Palestine. And I believe that each of us has a power to ensure each other. And I was reminded about that as we were not only best friends, she was not only biracial even then, as her mother was a Mexican Catholic and her father a New York Jew and her mother converted. And we would spar as debate partners to see if we had the grit to defeat the white boys we had to go up against. Which was worse, the Holocaust or slavery? And we would debate each other back and forth until our hairs, she had a Jufro, and my kitchen was rising. And it made me ask myself, in the midst of this tragedy, where does your Black faith stand? Now, for those of you old enough to remember that period 15 years ago, during a moment which I and my husband were traveling quite a bit to Israel and Palestine. It was a period that witnessed the rising tide of the Obama presidential campaign and also the deep weaponization of the Obama family's 2 decades of attendance and membership at the legendary and liberating Trinity United Church of Christ here in this great city of Chicago, under the pastoral leadership of the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright Jr. It was during my sojourn in Jerusalem and various stretches of the Galilee region where I first heard the now infamous Fox News soundbite, quote, "God damn America," unquote. That was strategically cherry-picked to possibly undermine the momentum of then Senator Obama's political strides in the race for the United States White House, even as the far right of that almost forgotten politicized era of the early 2000s sought to castigate both Wright and Obama as un-American, and therefore suitable targets for their very public and visceral scrutiny, contempt, and hatred. A friendship forged in faith, lost in politics. I remember walking through the hallowed halls of Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center, and recognizing the ways in which people of good conscience, true faith, and genuine courage less than a century ago had to stand up and speak out against the horrifying rise of white supremacist politics and practices that are not merely totalitarian and socially repressive, but explicitly devoted to the establishment of a global order devoted to the direct animosity, alienation, and possibly even the annihilation of the other. To quote former US President Jimmy Carter, who is the reason why I became a Christian social ethicist at his insistence, has declared that the current arrangement between Israelis and Palestinians was nothing less and is nothing less than apartheid, and is deeply injurious to all parties involved. Even more, to walk through the maze-like streets situated in the densely populated heart of Jerusalem and realize that it is not so much divided as it is simply broken into racially, ethnic, and religious enclaves is a torturous realization of the holy city's reality. To make a long story short, in the wake of conducting research on an upcoming book on Black, Christian, and white Jewish explorations and the engagement of the book of Exodus, I was scheduled to be in Israel earlier this summer, but due to the rising unrest at the time of the more moderate and progressive Israelis denouncing of the authoritarian and autocratic moves by the current Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, that return to the Holy Land had to be postponed. So please allow me to express my utter dread for how much the growth of death and destruction that has become so much the narrative that is too easily dismissed when the average American disregards the death toll and confusing politics of the Middle East with a tired sigh and shameful shrug, because we know all too well that certain lives don't matter. Nevertheless, it has been my joy on both spiritual and scholarly levels to journey to meet with richly diverse and dynamic people who, in the wake of this last outburst of outrageous militarized violence, claim this region their home and to participate in desperately needed multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, multi-religious, and multi-generational conversations. And like many of us in this hush harbor and sacred space, I also hold deep and abiding faith commitments, which make this particularly tremendous yet traumatized region of the world as a crossroad of colonizers and conquerors holds a very special place in my head and heart and imagined history. In his classic masterpiece, Jesus and the Disinherited, Black mystic, minister, and mentor Howard Thurman wrote these words about the harsh history of the Holy Land for Jewish people. Quote, "There is one overmastering problem that the socially and political disinherited always face. Under what terms is survival possible? In the case of Jewish people in the Greco-Roman world, the problem was even more acute than under any ordinary circumstances because it had to do not only with physical survival in terms of life and limb, but also with the actual survival of culture and faith. Judaism, he says, was a culture, a civilization, and a religion, a total worldview in which there was no provision for any form of thoroughgoing dualism. The crucial problem of Judaism was to exist as an isolated, autonomous, cultural, religious, and political unit in the midst of a hostile Hellenic world, unquote. Equal parts prophetic and pastoral, Thurman clearly indicates the perennial cloud of menace that has threatened Jewish existence from antiquity, even now in the age of postmodernity. There is no question why anti-Semitism has been known alternately as the world's oldest hatred. Moreover, published in 1949, Thurman was writing the statement about the modes of survival and resistance for the disinherited in recognition of the plight of the worldwide Jewish community in the immediate shadow of Nazi Holocaust as a sympathetic sable-skinned sage, but also prophesizing the rising tide of civil rights struggles here in the United States. Or as my colleague, Jewish scholar David Nelson would say, blacks, Christians, and white Jews need to talk more because you all know by cultural memory what we only know as historical record. So why talk about the events of last week? Because it's black on both sides and black faith on trial. In his 2008 memoir, The Holocaust is Over, We Must Rise from Its Ashes, former Speaker of Israeli Knesset Avraham Berg offers a deeply reflective and self-aware critique of the geopolitical state affairs of his homeland. Berg pointedly addresses how, in light of his own people's tearful and terrifying encounters with empire and genocide, the existential hatred of Israelis' intent on reviling Palestinians as the inhumane others. When he summarizes the psychologically and morally precarious position of modern Israel as a Jewish state, he says, "We fight to break the vicious cycle, which was our portion since Esau, Pharaoh, Goliath, Adrian, Vespasian, Kemlinsky, Hitler, and the rest of the supervillains. But the more we fight them, the more we feel heavy-handed like them, like Esau. We have forgotten the obligations that our earlier generations took upon themselves. We treat them as if they never vowed in Hillel, the elders' brilliant summation of the Torah. Do not do unto others what is hateful to you. We hated it, and we are doing it, sometimes much too joyously. Is it any wonder no one wants to be our friend anymore when we practice expropriations, injustice in military courts, abuse roadblocks, food shortages, and worst of all, contempt for Arab life, unquote. By reworking the often quoted but seldom enacted golden rule via negativia, Berg is imploring all of us not to fall victim and prey to the insidious, invasive, cyclical thinking of white supremacy that makes a sort of militarized and state-sanctioned brutality on both sides of this conflict we are witnessing, not just possible, but necessary to the maintenance of the racial, ethnic, and religious status quo that only serves the needs of the powerful elites and not the poor and innocent people who have been blackened by bludgeoning and bad faith. The modern state of Israel, as it is nestled in the crux of the Holy Land, as a historic region of the world, which, to borrow from Winston Churchill, produces more history than it can consume. The ongoing crisis of last weekend's military action is not only enmeshed in a troubling contemporary nexus of religion, realpolitik, revenge, and real estate, but is also deeply rooted in the millennia of armed conflict, disruption, displacement, war, hatred, despair, resistance, and counter-resistance. And like all armed conflicts, what is happening on the ground between Israel and Palestine is messy, complicated, hard to process, and ultimately heartbreaking. The escalating loss of life, the blockade of food, water, medical aid, and electricity, the unrelenting violence, and the sheer mental, physical, and psychological trauma of these ongoing struggles should truly take their toll on those of us who are Black by faith, leaders through oppression, and peacemakers through hell, and citizens trying to find a landmark in a landmarkless territory. That being said, I can attest that for many of us, we had been indoctrinated by the guardians of the status quo at the gates of education and learning and religion. As legend becomes myths, they preserve the ways things are and put into place systems of knowledge persuasion that preserve status for some and bar entry for others. In terms of its religious utility, when it is in service to our reality, myth is not regarded as lie, but rather as revered narrative and perspective reflective of what many people wholeheartedly believe. The enduring power of myths and their accompanying symbols is predicated upon discerning the fine line between belief and truth. When myths are taught, which is to say, undergirded by academic, scholarly, and intellectual power, they not only are given permanence, but also become validly esteemed as objective truth. The doctrinal dimension of the good life, as an example, is essential for distinguishing and differentiating the projections and shadows that myths cast. The discipline of education and schooling produces knowledge that shapes our lives as to what is good, which is to say, education creates a learning machine that indoctrinates Americans to accept social and cultural norms, assumptions, and lies about themselves and others as fact and unchallenged belief. This is pride, which we could understand as the arrogance of ignorance. Pride is falsehood assorted and assumed as certainty. In Christocentric terms, it's the pinnacle of human hubris to focus on our ability that is too often rooted in illusions of our own grandiosity. Rather than how Hebrews 11:1 articulates our faith in the divine, when we substitute that emphasis with our own self-aggrandizing feats and self-serving facts, these also stand. Lies also stand as the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence and convictions of things not seen. So do you believe in faith or do you believe in lies? Your Christian ethics makes all the difference. Philosopher David Hume assesses pride as a pleasant sensation and humility as a painful one. Pride is deemed by many as the greatest of sins. American pride emanates from the substance of American patriotism and the magnanimity of the United States, which God should only see fit to bless. As a first world power that has held hegemonic influence and impact on human activity on much of the world's populace for more than a century. Yet, as Kelly Brown Douglas reminds us in Stand Your Ground, this nation is also governed and guided by a myth, a lie, called American exceptionalism. The United States is regarded by many in the world as unparalleled in the plenitude of its pride as well as the paucity of its national self-awareness that uses a self-perception of innocence as a mode of exemption from any modicum of blame or guilt regarding the problems of the world today. And it's for this reason so many of us have given up being made in the image of or being made in the Imago Dei, lest people confuse that the Imago Dei is also diversity, equity, and inclusion. And because we're afraid of the powers that be, we give up on God and make of God those things that serve us. Said another way, a widely understood feature of the United States is its reluctance or inability to learn moral lessons from its past great empires and to gauge its historical significance relative to them. Pride in this respect has been founded upon Gandhi's blunder of knowledge without character, in that we have been indoctrinated to believe that self-knowledge is more about trusting our feelings about ourselves as opposed to gaining an enlightened, factually informed historical self-understanding so as to build and advance common ideals such as fellowship, freedom, and flourishing, which is to say the system of knowledge production privileges the national functionality of its citizens to the detriment of their national character and moral formation. The rising intolerance for critical reflection and analysis has coddled the American mind in such a way that it has compromised its character and ability to search for wisdom. And it's not just in the classroom, but this too is a reason why so many of us have shrunk the church. Nevertheless, a cottage industry made up of white lies and many, all too often, white male scholars who have produced pundits, politicians, and preachers who have now emerged as they make their bread and butter condemning historical revisionism while simultaneously endorsing ethnocentric narratives to make America great again, which really means to put so many of our minds and bodies in chains again. There are many people who have profited from the lost cause of counterfactual research as a scholarly pursuit that promotes fiction as fact while rarely suffering professional or personal consequences. They are the harbingers of history who aim to preserve the aforementioned lies that have become legend and birthright to legacies. They give gravitas to the myths that have menacingly mocked not only the horrors of the past, but also have stagnated scholarship and accelerated the decline of the pursuit of truth and greater knowledge. The underrepresented scholar often finds herself under the gun and compelled to actively respond to and disprove controversial counterclaims recognized as worthy of scholarly attention. Don't teach womanist that. Don't teach critical race theory this. Don't make our students uncomfortable when they learn what their parents and grandparents have done. And at the same time, having the scholarly integrity oftentimes means lacking the agency to use it. In that misinformation is used to indoctrinate and inform social power in the place of scholarly prowess and academic expertise. While postmodernists have claimed that the failure of the Enlightenment was a matter of falling short of philosophical courage, we on the underside of a post-everything era must explore how its greatest shortcoming was its hubris. Paying attention to how Western scholars have centered pride in their view of the world as the ultimate worldview, this lecture, in its entire series over the last 20-some-odd years, must be to use Black faith to examine such pride as we realize that greed is not good and evil is not what it means to make a living. Lecture series such as this, institutions such as this, spaces such as this implore us in our Christian social ethic to reform our stewardship to the telos of our highest ideals and roles, responsibilities and rights, as scholar practitioners and as students and preachers like Rooks, in order to confront the shortcomings of our time and help realize the ultimate capacity of being enlightened and empowered. And it is not only our right, but it's a responsibility and mandate of our religion, as feminist liberationist Bev Harrison once said, to undo what history has done. In an effort to be foils and not fooled, our Christian social ethic must shape the moral conscience of our institutions, church, state, and academy, and must attend to the insistent practice and insurgent pedagogy of understanding moral agency and responsibility as a force to be used for good as its ultimate end. To take up the crux of our scholarly telos is to engage in a meta-ethical project, not simply for the failed project of the Enlightenment, but also for the undermining of the Christian, but also for mining the Christian ethical task of social justice. Towards this end, we must introduce a meta-ethical framework for answering theoethical questions with logic and epistemological insight. This is evident in the mandate of the social gospel as the Black faithful democratic principle of paideia, as implied in Micah 6:8 and Luke 4:18. My good colleague and brilliant ethicist Gary Dorian, in his estimation of the genius and generative spirit of Black religion, extends the claims of the Black Theological Thought Project that he says is formed by the core of the character of Black people who have been enslaved in history, who have shown us what liberation is, and who know the core of divine justice. Those of us who have maintained that education can never be a neutral process, but rather it either indoctrinates us into an unjust system of domination or liberates us as learners who transform the system for the cause of justice. By privileging the critique of oppression, foregoing the serenity of the status quo, and linking divine justice to social justice, we must outline an insurgent pedagogy of Black faith as practitioners whose work is to form moral theologians, no matter where they find their home, thereby disavowing ties to the lost causes of empire and taking up instead the struggle for success of not only the social gospel, but also the very soul of democracy itself. First, the crucial role of this Christian social ethic must be to debunk the current crisis of hubris, especially within the white Christian imagination, which is the core to decolonizing theological education and securing social justice. This means that liberalism in the modern West, whether it's constitutional democracy or the structure of the late-stage capitalism, is quite literally comprised by this notion of pridefulness, to the extent where you have the fragility and, in many cases, the failure of democratic practices and institutions that caused the rise of the MAGA movement in the United States, as we're still reeling from the aftermath of the big lie from Trump and his supporters about the 2020 election outcome, as well as the January 6, 2021 insurrection, but also combating the backlash against critical race theory, African American studies, and other curricular fields focused on the historically oppressed and underrepresented. This is in addition to the rise of far-right movements and even governments being installed in various European nations, whether we're talking about Spanish Parliament or the neo-fascist government in Italy, or Erdogan's control over Turkey, or the former Soviet satellite Eastern European nations, such as Viktor Orban's takeover of Hungary. There are various places in which we need to speculate or question Putin's attack on the Ukraine or what he's attempting to do there. So while we're witnessing all of this, the question remains, does our Christian social ethic have an actual witness in terms of talking directly or forcefully to any of these issues? And do we even have an education that will help us understand those realities in face of our own? To this end, we must attend to the essence of the telos of the Enlightenment and the commitments of liberalism. Here we can look to Richard Rorty, who in the 1990s wrote the text Achieving Our Country, in which he was inspired by the writings and thoughts of James Baldwin in The Fire Next Time. In trying to address his stance as a philosopher, Rorty was trying to speak to what could and should be liberalism in response to this rising tide in his midst. The tide was rising, but had not yet, or hardly had yet, risen to shore. Rorty was already speculating from a white, mainstream, or traditionalist point of view. He was questioning what could or should be done in terms of dealing with multicultural, multiracial, multi-faith societies in the future that was yet to be written. But many conventional people and guilds in the mainstream of philosophy, ethics, religion, and politics marveled at his intellectual acumen and were okay in terms of his professional pedigree, but kept his impact and his prescriptions at arm's length, and that they still did not take seriously the charges that he leveled against Western thought and what Western thought needed to do, not just to simply survive, but to thrive in the 21st century. Rather, they challenged him for seeing the genius in the restructuring and decentering that was offered by the queering of a Black, gay, erstwhile Christian voice like Baldwin's. And there, white conservatives, like some Black do-good church folk, reject wisdom in its midst, because we don't talk about that. We don't teach that. We don't preach that. And we definitely don't take that task to heart. But that very much is our case and task. Secondly, and consequently, we must note that our critical responsibility must be to decenter our localized delusions of comfort and navel-gazing. If COVID-19 taught us anything as scholars and students of a post-everything era, it is that disease and peril, like power and delusion, have no boundaries or borders that humans can control or keep under strict watch. Viruses have their own intelligence. And viruses are not as ignorant as we are, for they have a true will to survive. The context in which it can, and know the context in which it can thrive, and the host in which it must reside, and how it must evolve to simply stay alive. This is not merely the coronavirus, but the virus of racial violence and cultural intolerance as well. Here we are in this moment now on the other side of the century, some 2.5 decades after Rorty penned his tome, and while recently observing the 60th anniversary of the likes of King's March on Washington and the sentimentality of the beloved community, World House, and our global summer of racial reckoning. This recognizes a corrective and a condemnation of the world that the Enlightenment has made, because there's still a comfort, convenience, and complicity, all baked and steeped in white ethnocentric and nationalist pride, that will not allow for this kind of rapprochement to occur. This would mean that recognizing the threat that is seen by Black and brown refugees and immigrant populations, to looking whether we're talking about European Union or United States politicians, that's not a flaw of these systems, it is a feature of Western democracy. Likewise, when many churches and church leaders, be they Black or white, cannot dare to reimagine the community and the kingdom of God because they still want kingdoms to be made manifest in the world. They still want a hierarchical and hegemonic power structure embedded in the pridefulness, rather than saying that a new paradigm and paragons need to be established. This is pride in its power, and that will be the death of us. It makes of us cruel gods dependent upon cheap grace. Grounding and basing civitas in the discourse and discipline invested and more prevalent in European circles and consciousness, whether it's Paul Gilroy's Black Atlantic or Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities, the fluidity and the flux of nationhood and nation states that has been largely the history of modernity of the last 5 years has been lost. But only within the 20th century do we witness a rise of genocide in various parts of the globe, including the fringes of Europe, as borders move over Mexico and call themselves Texas, as children are put into cages and Black blood floods the streets. There are so many places in the modern world, so many places where democracy has become the lie, and evil the only truth we can count on. Beholden and indebted to the thoughts of Kant and thoughts of other grand political philosophies of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, among others, we have reached the telos of human civilization, and yet with all those grand imaginations and machinations, folks fail to see evil in its midst. Folks fail to see Putin. Folks fail to imagine that there could be a COVID-19 pandemic. Folks fail to recognize the notion of a Donald Trump. And the world is being morally and socially indicted more than he is because of such a gross lack of awareness and refusing to see the grotesque in our midst. So lastly, we must realize our Christian social ethic insists that we do not have the right to remain silent on such matters, by tucking ourselves and our consciousness away in lofty idealism of Black faith deformed and disgraced by the solipsism of ivory towers. Neither can we remain blinded by the personal piety of stained glass ceilings and cushy pews. If we abnegate our duty to teach, preach, and produce knowledge that not only builds a good society, but is accountable to our reality, and the realization of it in such a way that it is accessible to the majority. It will not be the charlatan stances of a David Irving, but a rival so omnipresent and ubiquitous that we will not be able to reign in its power. Such is the case with artificial intelligence. ChatGPT. With all these great imaginings, the emergence of constitutional democracies, the expansion of free market capitalism, and the rise of civil society in the cyber age via the internet, don't you realize we lost our vote to bots? And we count on Alexa to arm our homes and entertain our children and to be surrogates for our mind. Because from the Enlightenment to where we are now, consciousness as we see it in the United States, due to our conservative pundits and politicians telling us to be woke, aka conscious, is a problem. And that they would rather that we in the world be unwoke and unconscious. Let that sit with you for a moment. Think, if the height of human civilization, the pinnacle and apex of what we have accomplished is to bring some form of sentience of our own or organic, humanly curated and created form of consciousness. If this is the end all and be all of our essence, and we have a viable and vocal contingent of the world's polity saying that it is not what they want. They don't want thinking or thought to be part of the bargain. What then do we as scholars and proclaimers of the gospel do with that? Or are we asleep at the wheel? When folks are antagonized by the emergence of liberation theologies and threatened by the advancement of Black liberation theology, womanist, queer, and other standpoint theologies, they feel betrayed or besieged by the articulation that the subaltern, oppressed, and marginalized of every walk of life in every nation are now the villains rather than the victims of modernity. That is, people alive and in living color at the intersections and underside of social ills of racism, sexism, classism, and heterosexism are less valued than the tomes and tombs of dead white men. Dead white men whose treaties in their highest idealized states are also bastardized if we claim that no constitution can be a living, organic, or expanding document. If they didn't mean what they said, even if there's hypocrisy in their brand of democracy, if their very words claim that humans are citizens and citizens are human, yet we extend partial humanity to some citizens and partial citizenship to some humans, making those who are not white men property, problems, or parasites, that abrogates and violates the terms and the conditions of our existence. White supremacy, masquerading as pride, propels oppression rooted in unrealistic and irrational fear of the other, will be the death of us all if left unchecked. In light of how we define and debate about our Christian social ethics, not as a discipline, we should understand it as a practice. This is significant because if we have a duty to maintain humanity as a whole, we must tend to this notion of human difference. As Samantha Power in her text, and a problem from hell states, in citing the Holocaust, we need to declare, much less condemn, genocide and other mass atrocities, whether they be the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, or ethnic cleansing, whether it be in the US or in America. We need to heed such warnings and mind our own time in relation to the rising tide of white supremacy and neo-fascism. As in his study of race and identity, Frantz Fanon in Black Skins, White Mass states, quote, "At first thought, it may seem strange that the anti-Semite's outlook should be related to that of the Negrophobe. It was my philosophy professor, a native of the Antilles, who recalled that fact to me one day. Whenever you hear anyone abuse Jews, Frantz, pay attention, because he's talking about you." And I found that he was universally right, by which I meant that I was answerable in my body and in my heart for what was done to my brother. But later I realized what he really meant. Quite simply, an anti-Semite is inevitably an anti-Negro, unquote. Ultimately, when we have developed hashtags, activist campaigns, and social justice movements out of whole cloth or galvanizing individual as well as institutional resources to combat anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, the list can go on and on. We can see anti-Semitic grassroots initiatives taking place. It is with this fulsome recognition that the status quo does not always automatically make space for those of us who look, live, and love differently than the presumed norm. Nevertheless, human difference must no longer be viewed as deficiency, nor toleration be considered as the optimal stage of cultural relations. Persistence of such thinking, being, and doing is not merely a failure either of individual or identified populations. Instead, this is a failure of our professions, of our polis, our philosophies, public practices, pulpits, and politics. However, moving forward in good faith of a shared future as part of a global civil society not only entails but demands the steadfast belief that each and every one of us has the civil and human right to be free. Lofty as the claim might seem, it will only be accomplished when all of these efforts to transform ecumenical congregations into religious spaces of human difference and faith communities to be the best of our collective endeavors, so we might free ourselves from hubris by never forgetting our history and the good and bad faith that formed it. Even now, I can hear the Right Reverend Dr. Rooks wonder in his witness, what in the name of Zion are you preaching and teaching in the first place? That being the case, it leaves one to ask the question, as we are racing forward to the mark for the prize of a high calling, if we are not ready, willing, and able to be the revolutionaries that confront truth, then what are we doing to truly decolonize our faith and race forward together? Let us not make our Black faith white lies. May our witness, like Rooks, like Chicago Theological Seminary, like your president, Brad Braxton, let our witness be a religious center where true believers gather to shift religious paradigms, to open intellectual doors, to knock down hegemonic barriers so all folk can live, move, and have our being, if not in the Holy of Holies, then at least in these yet to be United States. Thank you.
Well, she gave us a lot to think about, didn't she? Thank you, Dr. Floyd-Thomas. Well, I am not Camilla Rashid or Stephanie Crumpton. But I do I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you today, but we are going to kind of open it up. You, first of all, thank you for everything that you gave us on today. You gave us a very good call on the importance of showing our faith and speaking up. And I kept thinking about your friend that you talked about and how she talked about how it's so polarizing now. And then conversations I've had with other people this week, how do we help our people develop a more nuanced way of having these conversations as we speak forward?
My grandmother would always say, a brilliant woman, a philosopher in her own right, she said, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, and all kinfolk ain't kind. So if you can't love the one you want, love the one you're with. And that's what it means to be human, to be humble, to literally to grow where you are planted. And so if, when, and where we enter any engagement, whether it is a relationship, an institution, a position, a call, you have to take your tea with you. You have to take your truth. And if in offering your truth, not just a sacrifice of vulnerability, but the gift of communion, then you open yourself up to what Martin Buber calls the I thou, right? Or as the intercessory song, I need you to survive, right? Those of us who identify as Christian practice the New Testament ethic of where 2 or 3 are gathered. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Because individual salvation and personal piety doesn't care about 2 or 3. It cares about 1. Right. But where 2 or 3 are gathered, touchy and agree, there divine things happen. So divinity is in diversity, right? Anything that we eat, anything that we consume, we want diversity. So we will always want diversity except when it deals with people. Right. I mean, so many of us have acid reflux, but we still want spicy food. Right. Right? That we actually have that taste for that thing, even if it makes us uncomfortable, because we know that there's something good about it. And then even that, as an example, do y'all see I'm hungry? Even that, Sister Johnson told me to go to the reception. Even that, as an example, we are willing to consume other people's cultures, but never want to entertain the people. I mean, how many of us can't go a week without Mexican, Chinese, Indian? I mean, I'm in Chi-Town. I know y'all know. Especially in Texas, in big portions. But don't want to be bothered with having a Mexican, an Indian. Help me somebody, a Chinese person. So the very products we consume, the very consumable goods we go into hock for, we don't see the people who produced it as good. On most of our predominantly white college campuses and universities, as long as a black male has a ball in his hand and he's running down a field, we can worship him. Go! But if we see that same body carrying a book, he's going to get carded or considered suspect. So I think the starting place is our truth, and knowing that when our truth is given, that somebody else's truth is in close proximity to touching it. And when we allow that to happen, divine things happen. And that's really the push. That's really decolonizing theological education. And I know that's dangerous territory. But all of us know, that's why I'm an ethicist, not a theologian, so I can get away, theology ends with theodicy, but that's where we start, right? We're going to let God handle God. We need to start with our mess, right? But we all know that any attempt to define who God is a failure. We know God is greater. So why are we trying to rein in what that looks like? Right, and so that's the sin of human hubris. But any time where 2 or 3 are gathered, you see, pride is broken up. As long as diversity, so wherever there is diversity, you have greater strives towards divinity.
I was
I teared up when you were talking earlier. But go ahead.
and thinking a lot of what you have challenged in so many ways about what also happens in the classroom that translates to what happens in our pulpits. And the idea of if Black faith in life is about liberation for others. I think about the ways in which we talk about the first century church. You talk about the ways in which they fellowshipped, and that the text Paul speaks about, they had all things in common. Everyone had what they needed, but considering the ways in which we can hide in the academy of not being able to actually provide for people what they need. And what people need most is truth. And as you were speaking, I thought about the cost of truth. And do you count the cost? And when you have counted the cost, are you willing to make that steps towards truth? So as a student, the question, as I think a budding theologian and scholar, and as a preacher, I don't sit at the top spot, but I sit in one of those supportive roles, the balancing between truth and the cost of that. And what do you believe is the first step for many of us in doing that?
I think it echoes the previous question, which is starting with your truth. See, nobody can deny your truth, right? I mean, what's the hymn? This is my story. This is my song. The blessed assurance of knowledge production, of the ability to learn, is knowing your truth. Because no one knows your truth like you do. What did the church mothers say in Pentecostal charismatic? I know that 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 I know. Right? Zora Neale Hurston says, I think it's between Phoebe and Janie, and their eyes are watching God. And they're sitting on the back porch, because women had to talk on the back porch. They didn't be on the front porch with the men, with Joe Stark and them. But the women had the last say. They're on the back porch. And Janie's talking about all the hell and high water, literally, that she went through. And Phoebe says, Janie, I just feel 10 feet taller, just listening to you. And she said, oh, Phoebe, she said, you got to go there to know there. And she says, I just don't feel comfortable with myself anymore because you've shown me what is possible. And she basically says, I'm going to run off and see what the end's going to be. I'm going to go fishing where the men go. And there is the passion and blessed assurance that we have in our own story is the currency that can afford the cost. It's when you go into these ivory towers, right? That's the white solipsism I was talking about. Or you deal with the comfort and the privilege of personal piety. That you become so heavenly bound that you're no earthly good. Or you're so busy raising hell that you can't bring heaven down to earth. But when you know your story, there's a comfort in that. And if that story is linked up with what is good for you can be good for another, then it becomes liberative. Otherwise, you become a charlatan. See? The problem is, what you're catching on to, how many of us are walking through institutions getting degrees, but we're getting the education of David Irving's rather than Deborah Lipstadt? And what does that mean as a student? It means that you become an ethicist. No, but you ask those Socratic questions that you never be satisfied. Ask the question. That's why the most brilliant, the children will lead them, as the word says, because children ask what? Why? They ask questions. And how do we train children? To numb up and dumb down. To be quiet and to be silent. So that's why I said those of us who are really engaged in the Christian social ethic of liberation and freedom, we do not have the right to remain silent. And the currency we have is a story of our own faith. And that can survive any cost.
I kind of want to come back because what you were just talking about, what kind of education you have as students. But as you said in your talk, we've all been, indoctrinated, right? We've all been indoctrinated at some point. And, not only in institutions of high, but even in our religious institutions, right? Because of the things that we were taught. So those who have gotten past that, how do we help them decolonize that part or deconstruct some of that? Like, because of course, like you just said, like kids ask questions. My daughter asks all the questions in the world, and we always joke about raising a woman as girl, and you want them to ask questions, but then it kind of start getting a little old.
When theory becomes practice is the problem.
But in real life, it's like, oh my God, another but they ask questions. But I'm wondering, like, how do we start to interrogate ourselves? or do we? You know what I'm trying to say?
Well, the work of education and the wonderment of faith, as my father, who was a military officer, naval officer, would say, whenever I thought I did a great job, he would say, the biggest room is a room for improvement. Right? So it's to want to grow. And if we think that we've already arrived, that's when atrophying happens. Right? So if we're not being stretched, it's like what I tell my students, they're like, you just give so many papers, you just, there's so much grading, da, 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 da. And I say, well, mediocrity has no enemies. Right? One sign that you're complicit is when no one has a problem with you. Right? Phoebe says to Janie, I'm not comfortable with myself now. And so again, how do we teach this thing when we've also have drunk the Kool-Aid and we know the flavor all too well? It's the testimony. It's talking about when we were in Plato's cave ourselves. See, so many of us always want to say that we were always there. I say I grew up black missionary Baptist in Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, until the oil spill came. I literally, it took, when my husband, Dr. Floyd-Thomas, who is a wonderful historian, I would ask him, he said, you know what, I just realized, I think this was like our third year of marriage. He said, you know nothing about history. And I said, I grew up in Texas. And history was the Alamo. And there was a reason. So when we talk about, people like Abbott or Rod Page's No Child Left Behind, this is a Texas strategy. Now, Texas used to be one of the top 10 states for higher education and getting admitted into, and that's when I was coming up. But even then, these strategies actually meant that every child was going to be left behind. That whatever was being, it's like, when Trump says, I'm the least racist person I know. Right? I'm the least sexist, like whatever he's saying. Narcissist is the exact opposite, right? So we have to talk about where we were and where we are now. And if we can't tell that truth, right? If we can't tell that truth, then we don't have the right to teach. If we can't, the best sermon, and anybody in here who preaches, the best sermon you've ever preached is the one that what? That convicted you. But we're told, we're indoctrinated to believe the one that put the most money in the coffer. So if it's the one that put the most money in the plate, what was the sermon you were preaching? The one that you should have kept silent about. Most often. Most often. We do that in our scholarship. Right? One of the things I tell people oftentimes about scholarship, especially for junior scholars who are trying to come in the ranks, oftentimes it's probably like looking for a patron when you're writing a slave narrative. Because after you've been edited so many times, and after you have capitulated so many times to the editor that would be the scholar, that's not. And using you with what integrity, with what agency? And we have to clap back. Right? And to the extent that we say, well, this is no longer my story. Right? So it is always, history always starts with our own truth.
As you're speaking, I was just reminded of the late Dr. Rufus Burroughs Jr., who, in a class at the other CTS that I took with him, he would say it was always about the prophetic ethical witness of the Black church. And we'd be in class, and he said, you'll write papers, and you will use inclusive language because that's what I required. He said, you will talk about things in a way, and you will be open to other things, to otherness, because that's what I've required for you. He said, but I will show up after you graduate into the churches that you will go into, and you will lack the courage to tell the truth. you will speak something opposite of what you wrote in the papers. And I'm always reminded anytime I am doing sermon prep, I hear him talking and speaking that you need to speak the truth, have the courage to do it. And I mean, I had never been in a class where, on the first day of class, you're going over the syllabus, and there's a portion in there that says, you will lack the courage. None of you will have the courage. That's what he would say, and he'd get up at the beginning of many of our lectures to let us know, you won't have the courage to talk about these things. You'll write about them. You'll talk about it in these maybe protected, safer places or presumed safe spaces, but we will go silent when we go before the people. Because, of course, counting the cost, like, I can't do it here. You tell us, if you can't do it here, then you can't do it anywhere.
That is so true.
And so as you were speaking today, even the conviction of being challenged that I cannot be silent. And even in my work as an organizer, everything we do is about lived experience. We invite people to tell their story. Not me tell it through my lens, but for them to tell their story, which is about probably the most powerful thing that we can do. We've won a lot of things here in Chicago recently from people telling their own story. So I'm grateful for that reminder. Yes, there will be a cost, but the truth lies even in our own stories and our willingness to have the courage to speak it.
And when those stories are accountable to other stories, right? I wouldn't have even had the courage or the wherewithal to do tonight's lecture if it wasn't for my childhood best friend, Liz Levy's posting, right? So part of being able to tell our story is to make sure that we have people who hold us accountable. And that's what's beautiful about theological education, because this is a living laboratory of enlightenment and empowerment. It is the place where you can save souls and lives without losing your minds in the process. Before coffers matter, before tenure matters, before stained glass windows and named bricks and pews matter, people remember you when. And they convict you. And they don't necessarily convict you by confronting, but they convict you because their presence is a mirror to your past self that keeps you humble. And I remember just as clear as day, I was at Candler School of Theology, but I was taking a class in Black Liberation Theology, which we didn't have that semester I was taking. I took it with Jackie Grant at ITC. And there was a big argument about inclusive language. That's why I'm going to this, because you mentioned that. And so people are like, well, why can't I say, our Father who art in heaven? Why? What's wrong with that? And there was a girl in the classroom who had never spoken before, and she said, because if your father raped you, you don't want to know how he arts in heaven. And she said, so just hearing that, I was convicted. But it took that story, that's vulnerable now, but that was her truth. And she didn't talk much in class. But after that truth, no one in that class had a problem with inclusive language. And every single time I pray, guess who comes to my mind when the Lord's Prayer is said? So having people, not just allies that mock and mirror back to you what you want to hear, but help you remember when you either left Plato's cave and saw the light, or the people that you left in the cave. It's that process. And to know that there's always a part of it that's in the cave. See, it's not the whole, all of us still are cave dwellers. And the glimmer is some of us, some part of us, is dancing in the light. And the thing is to not rejoice in the beauty of Du Boisian fantasies of the double consciousnesses that to exist is to love being almost torn asunder. No, let's free ourselves to the light. And the more people that hold us accountable to that light and that are with us, and the more people who remind us of the horrors of hell and the hounds of hell that are on our track, the more we can press towards the end and see what it's going to be. Thank you all so much for this rich and rewarding evening.
If you would, bow your heads and join me for our closing blessing. God, we thank you. We thank you for sending us your scholar, your prophet. We thank you for sending us someone who has been such an extraordinary steward of her many and profound gifts. We thank you for the way in which she has encouraged us tonight, blessed us, enlightened us, and challenged us. God, she has placed a challenge and a call on this learning community to be courageous at a time when death-dealing powers are dependent upon the denial of our history, the distortion of facts, and the denigration of our experiences. And so, God, we ask that this challenge to decolonize who we are would rest with us, and not only in our hearts and minds, but we ask that something that Dr. Stacey Floyd-Thomas has said tonight might change who we are and change how we are together in this community. Amen.